Today, we're talking with my guest, Ryan Guerra, and I'm really excited for you guys to meet him today. His bio is going to be in the description, and he is someone I have looked up to for a long time, especially with what he's doing with men, husbands, creating a community for them. And I'm excited to have him talk about that today. But first, because I really like to talk about growth, Ryan, we're all very growth minded here. We want to try to get better every day because we know if we're getting better, we can be better for the ones around us. So I would love to know, what's your biggest tip for growth as someone who prioritizes family, health, community, and faith amidst your busy life?
Oh man, okay. I love this
I
question.
know it's a big one.
And stop me if I start rambling because
No,
I
I
love
love it.
talking on this topic. Okay, I would say that over over the last couple of years, one of the things that has really become clear to me personally, and then as I've been able to observe so many other people and work with a lot of men who are pursuing growth, is that so often when we think about growth, we approach it first from the standpoint of what do I need to do? What is it that I need to do next to grow? And I think that success with that approach typically requires a good amount of luck, because what I've found is that growth really starts best when it's rooted in not what we need to do, but who are we to be. And
Love that.
growth absolutely has to start. If we want to avoid the frustration and the starts and the stops, which there still will be, we can do that so much better when we start with who is it that I need to be? Who is it that I'm called to be in the area that I'm pursuing growth? And so ultimately it comes down to identity. You know, what is the identity that I am called to pursue and to show up with um, in my family, in my career, in my relationships, in my community? And what that does for us is then if we know what that identity is or we have a sense of it, uh, we can step back then and say, okay, what is the standard to which somebody who operates with this identity holds themselves to? And so it's this bigger picture approach to growth of starting not with the to-do list and the task list, which I'm a big to-do list guy. We live off post-it notes and checklists in our house.
Post-its.
Yep,
For
yep.
sure.
And it allows us to just get that bigger picture. And what it also does is it puts us in a mode of inspiration versus motivation. Sometimes it's hard to get moving. We think that just move, do the next thing, do the next thing. But man, if we keep doing that down the wrong path, pursuing the wrong identity and outcome, we end up looking back and saying, man, ooh, I got to go back and start over. But we can be inspired when we have an identity pursuit that we are getting after. We can be inspired by it, and that makes us feel, not just move. We have the sense of, man, okay, pursuing this makes me feel the way that I want to feel when I interact with my family, when I interact in my career pursuits. And so I would say that growth comes down to starting with what is the identity you want to pursue? What is the standard that somebody with that identity operates within? And then when we see that standard, then we can start kind of reverse planning from that standard and creating the day to day, the week to week, the month to month things that will help us reach that standard and meet that standard as often as we can.
That's so good, Ryan. And honestly, like as someone who works with causal coaching, which is essentially getting to the root thinking behind why we're doing what we're doing and all of that and creating the outcomes, it really does start with what's going on between our ears with that
Yep,
thinking. And
absolutely.
everything else does follow when you have that identity,
Yep,
which sets that standard, which
yep,
then creates those, okay, well, what am I doing? What am I not doing? And how is that going to look?
right. And
So
I think what it
powerful.
does too is it does give you the opportunity to have something you're holding yourself up against that's not just a checklist. Because man,
Mm,
I don't know about you, but more days than not, I end the day without having accomplished everything on my checklist. And that
yep.
feels like failure. And that produces discouragement. And that stalls us out on our path oftentimes versus identity. You can say, okay, I might not have gotten everything done today, but am I moving closer towards that standard? Am I pursuing what it takes to, and also it allows us to kind of edit that process too and say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I thought pursuing that identity and this calling looked like this, but maybe I need to make some adjustments.
It's true. A checklist, a to-do list can kind of be a big fat bully at the end of the day
Oh,
sometimes, where it's like,
easy.
man,
100%.
I feel like I got nothing done today. I don't know. Have you ever like added stuff to your checklist just so you could check it off because you did that
Oh,
instead?
at the end of the day, I often sit down and on my
Yep.
daily planner, I'll be like, oh, I did this today, and I'll add it and check it. Absolutely. I've
Right.
done that. I've done that. And yeah, and it takes us out of that mode of, performance and
Mm,
puts us more in the mode of progress. And
yeah.
then being able to give grace when the path on the path of progress is not just this linear path that we all
Right.
wish it was, right? But it's not.
Yeah. I do. I wish it was too.
Yeah.
I really do. I think but it is so discouraging and so defeating when we allow our checklist, our to do, to operate the direction of our life, right? To
Yep.
navigate that for us. I think that that's so good because you've got a lot going on in your life.
Yes.
And so does your wife. I
Yes.
am curious. So I mean, I've probably heard this answer before, but I would love to know, what was your experience when your wife started her business, and contrast that with how you feel about it today. For those who don't know, Ryan's wife, Harper, she is at the top of the company that I'm also partnered with. And she's a girl who didn't do goals back in the
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I was actually chatting with Harper on this, and I said,
Yeah.
I think this will probably come up, and we just because we're getting to the point where I'm thinking back to when that was. I'm like, that was a long time ago.
Right?
But when she started um, we always had a couple different things that we really wanted our life to look like, and we talked about from the beginning. And one it was we want people to be better off uh, after they have interacted with us, met us, gotten to know us than they were before. And two, we wanted to design a life that was integrated, and maybe not just what was common.
Mhm.
And we wanted to have the ability to make decisions not based on what we had to do, but what we felt led to do. And that's really intentional. That idea behind making decisions on what we felt led to do, because I think some people would look at it, and even us, we run into this as well. This thinking of make decisions based on what we wanted, well, not what we needed to do, but what we want to do. But as Christians, we oftentimes uh, create our plan. I'm speaking of Harper and I. We create our plan. We take it to God, and we're like, "All right, bless this plan, please. This is what we want to do."
Right.
And yet, we wanted to operate and grow in just the mode of surrender to Him, and saying, "This is what we feel you're leading us to do. Make it clear."
Mhm.
And we knew that what we did as a business and as careers would have an impact on that financially, and what the financial aspect and the freedom and the time freedom would provide. So all that to say, going back to your original question, when we first stepped into this business, I was actually pretty supportive.
Yeah.
I was
That's
pursuing,
great.
yeah, I was pursuing building a business in the investment advisory world,
Mhm.
and looked at this as, we're gonna pursue this, and it'll be a nice, some additional income. And so my role was really just to support, encourage her. She would tell you that I coached her, which is
That's
interesting. It's
awesome.
a fine line to ride as a husband, but that was really my role, was to support that and just say, hey, and also make sure that she kept tabs on what is it you want to accomplish, like what is it that you want to do here, and let's consider if it's the season to push for growth in this, because maybe we're pushing in other areas of life right now, and um, we need to consider our capacity. And so that was the role then. And then as time grew and as the business grew, I became more involved in the business, uh, probably about 8 years ago, in huge support of her and her role in the business. And as she and I both became involved in the business, one of the things we ran into is I stepped in uh, when the business grew to a certain point, and we just needed more hands on deck. And my big mistake of doing that was stepping in and trying to just do more of what she was already doing and what she was good at. And that was not a good approach. And so
No.
for couples who work together, that would be one of the the takeaways that I learned was, man, especially as husbands, like stepping in and trying to just like take the reins. I just learned that she is so good at so many things that I am not good at. And it took us about 6 months to really figure out, okay, what are the roles? What are we good at? And how do we complement each other instead of compete by trying to do the same things, side by side? And I really found that I didn't enjoy the things that she does so well that I was trying to do. And so that was a big learning experience and a huge takeaway from that transition. But yeah, today, huge fan of her efforts and her heart behind how she leads in her business, and want to do whatever I can to help cultivate that. And we look at this business as just one of the things that we do to serve people, and then also, give us the opportunity to be generous and pursue the other things that God has for us.
Yeah, I love that. There were a couple of things you said there, the twofold way of you wanted something that could better others, but also to have this integrated life of not had to decisions, but led to decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And you're so right. I mean, so many of the people in this world, and probably many of us in different seasons of our life, we have to make the decisions on had to, not even want to or need to. It's have to, right? Like there's no other option. So I love that was you guys' driving, and obviously the whole overall driving is always, well, what does God want us to do? What is he leading us to? What is it, how are we going to be faithful and obedient through this, right?
Yeah.
And then the other thing you said was when it came to pushing, season and capacity.
Mm-hmm.
So good, because I see a lot, and I've done it myself, that, I decided to push in a season that probably I shouldn't have. And turning around and looking at that, it led to a lot of like internal trauma for myself of, yes, I achieved those goals, but it felt completely out of alignment.
Yeah.
And, it set my brain up to look at goals in the future as I'm not sure I want to do that.
Right. This year was the first time I kind of formalized a process towards the end of the year on how to look ahead. And again, it kind of ties back into the growth conversation we had in the beginning about the not the to-do list, but pursuing the identity. But it also, very often we jump into what we think is next without saying, okay, but where have I been and where am I right now? And so this process, it feels slow because we just want to jump in and get going. And I think there is some things you can still do to keep moving forward. But I think at a time in life when you're evaluating what is next, it's really important to say, okay, where have I been and what have I accomplished based on where I've been that would be the evidence that I can accomplish what I want to accomplish next. Or maybe are there some things that I need to do before that? And then so importantly is, what season am I in right now? And being patient and giving ourselves grace to say, you know what, it's not a no, but it's maybe a no, not now, to pursue this based on what God's put on our plate right now in the season that we're in. And so I think that's important. And again, one of the big picture elements here is that I think so often people want to grow, but they get discouraged along the path. And so while I am so much forward focused and like big picture and vision oriented, it's almost
so am I.
It almost comes from my own learning of like, okay, that's good, but man, you've got to develop this good foundation to start from, to not avoid discouragement along the way, but to minimize it. Because when we hit those friction points, so often that's what gets us to stop or doubt ourselves or stack up what we call losses and say, oh, this just isn't for me. And so if we start, we know it's possible based on where we've been, where we are now. We have a much higher success rate at the things that we're pursuing. Plus, I think the Lord really wants us to look at those things too. Because he has led us through where we've been and to where we are. And that's important to say, okay, where do you have me? And is this me? And that's a big thing for us, is to be able to say how much of what I think or want next or want to grow in is me and maybe my own desires, my own agenda versus God's. But if we look at where God has led us from and led us to, we can have a much clearer picture of whether or not what we're pursuing next is part of his calling and purpose in our lives.
Yeah, I know. As someone who, this is where God has me right now, is learning to slow down to be present, because I am very much like you, Ryan. Like, I am looking ahead, like
Yes.
20 miles into the future,
Uh-huh. 100%.
and forgetting what's going on around me today. And also, I remember when I ran my first half marathon, I remember crossing the finish line and immediately thinking, well, what am I doing next?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
I hadn't even showered yet. And I was
Yeah.
already thinking, like, I didn't even spend time reflecting on that race. I was already blazing ahead. And it's not because it was a great race, it was terrible. I hated it. I don't know why I was thinking of doing it again, but I did.
You
Right?
finished.
Like,
You finished, and you knew you
I
could
did
probably
finish.
do it next time, right? Yeah.
I did finish. So, and I didn't die. So
Yeah.
apparently that translated to great. We're going to do it again.
Yeah. Definitely.
But yeah, I think that there's so much wisdom in what you said about, looking at where we've come from, where we've been,
Hmm.
the things that we've learned through that, and then what do we want to take with us in the future, and what needs to stay behind, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What are the good things? What are some better things that we could be
Yes.
shifting to instead? And honestly, I think this is why God naturally gives us seasons as
Um,
just an indicator for us to pause, to reflect, to
yeah.
rest, and to shift when we need to shift, right?
Right. Yep.
To lean into things we need to lean into, and to step away from things that, um, maybe had its time, but it's not right now, right?
You're so right, and that's actually that was a big topic of conversation when I led some men through this process at the end of last
Mm.
year. Was specifically seasons, and like if we
Mm-hmm.
look at our life seasonally and we hold it up against agriculture, like no
Mm-hmm.
farmer is going to go plant seed in the middle of the winter. And so, man,
Right.
if you're in a winter season, it's not time to plant new seeds. And and so figuring out that rhythm is really important. And I think as we
Yeah.
get older, you can look back and say, man, it seems almost like every 4 to 5 years there is this rhythm that God has us through. And as you throw kids into the mix and they get to different ages and stages of life, it creates this rhythm of growth and transition points and things like that. So just this awareness around where we've been,
Yeah.
where we are. And what I love is what you pointed out about is some of us who are so forward thinking, oh, is like, what's next? We also don't stop and celebrate the things that we've accomplished.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And
I'm not so good at that.
yeah, that's so important because what it does, it locks into our mind, uh, like what I was mentioning before, of the things that we've accomplished that prove that we have what it takes to accomplish the things that we want to accomplish in the future. And when we don't do that, we lose those touch points, of confidence and proof that we can do the things that we have done, which gives us evidence that we can accomplish what we have in mind for the future.
Yeah. Well, and even part of that, is what we're doing to our brain in that moment. Like I said, is we can inflict some trauma on our brains of,
Yeah.
I just worked really hard and that's it. Like, never going to do that again. Like, that doesn't sound fun to me. And so we're going to start to pull away from some of those things. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Not to
like,
burn out. Yeah.
right. That leads to burnout and exhaustion. And
Yeah.
I loved what you said about planting seeds in the winter, because all I think of is trying to plant a seed in ground that's frozen.
Yeah.
How hard is that?
Yep.
So we can be doing the same work that we would be doing in spring or
Right.
fall, but because the ground is frozen, we're expending enormous amounts of energy that we were never intended to.
Yeah. And I think I do think that when we look at growth, it's not always just a very homogenous, like I'm in a growth season in life, right? And then other
Right.
seasons are not. I think there's different areas of life too, and
Oh,
becoming
for
aware of
sure.
what those areas are and saying, hey, as a parent, this is a growth season. Like for us right now, we have all of our kids are shifting into double-digit ages, and along with that comes just this massive transition of
Yeah.
going from keeping them alive and fed and the basic stuff to like just a different type of parenting. And
Yeah.
so we know that right now is a growth season in that category for our life. And so we've looked at other parts of our life and said, man, this season in this category is requiring a lot. And so maybe some of these other areas, these are maintenance seasons.
Mm-hmm.
These are the seasons where we evaluate and we consider, just shoring things up a little bit and being ready for when that growth season starts there. So.
Yeah, that's so true. I know our kids are the same age as your kids.
Yep.
Almost. Our oldest is 12, but she will be 13 this year.
Yep.
And yes, it's totally different parenting. Like there's a part of me that wishes I just had to keep her alive, because that seemed to be easier now in retrospect.
Oh yes. Yeah.
The emotions and like walking through actual hard decisions and conversations, it's definitely different.
It comes back to the to-do list, right? Like,
Right?
if we have kids, we need to make sure they get enough sleep, make sure they eat. We teach them, a lot of basic things. And it's like we can check that off the list. These things is like I don't even know what to write to put this on any type of,
Right.
you know. So,
Exactly. Like help navigate this drama. I don't know.
your 12-year-old daughter has drama too. Okay, good to
Oh
know.
my gosh. Yes, yes. And I think most of it comes into play with technology because we didn't have technology growing up. I mean, I was born in 86 and like we had computers in schools, but nobody had cell phones, right?
Yeah,
Unless they were the huge ones or the car phones, like,
yeah,
right? So like our parents didn't walk through that with us. So now, our parents can't necessarily help because they didn't
yeah.
walk through that, and so we're navigating totally different things that like we didn't as kids and our parents didn't have to walk through. So
Absolutely.
it's challenging for
Yes.
sure.
Yes.
So you mentioned you had just walked through this process of helping men. I'm assuming, was this in your Forged Man Collective? And if so, I would love to just hear
Yeah.
more of this group and
Sure.
honestly how we can encourage our husbands to join a group like this, because I know, like, Zach, if I tell him something,
Yeah.
he's like, I'm not gonna do that.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so how can we encourage our husbands, and just tell us more about this group?
So of course I love talking about this, and I always like to preface it with everything that Forge Man Collective and then the cohort is really just a result of me saying I want to grow like this, I want to grow in this way, and then inviting other men alongside for the journey. It's not because I have accomplished it or have any like inside baseball on things. And so it's great to be able to lead it and facilitate it and get to know these men, but also feel like, man, I get so much out of it myself. And so,
Yeah.
but Forge Man Collective was founded for men who aren't satisfied leaving life and legacy to chance, and but who are busy, who seem to be or sense that they are stuck in the drift of what life often can put us in, and also have a sense that going it alone in the past has not yielded the best result in the things that they've pursued in the areas that they want to grow. And so provides community, provides encouragement, provides insight, and just a place for men to really jump in and step aside from the things they're pursuing each and every day, whether it's career, their own family, and take an hour. And this is on the cohort side, which is guys who are jumping into the membership side. And take an hour, and we dive deep on an element of what it means to be a man who lives in a way that doesn't leave life and legacy to chance. And we operate off three values: integrity, honor, and intention. And we consider integrity growing in the discipline of keeping the promises we make to ourselves.
So big.
And then honor is growing in keeping the promises we make to others. First and foremost, those closest to us who lean on us for love, learning, and leadership, right? And then lastly is intention, because to do those first two, we have to show up with intention, and we consider intention to be acting purposely and courageously in pursuit of being men of integrity and honor. And so we do that in a couple different places. Forge Man Collective has a Facebook. Guys who are curious about what it's all about, that's a good place to start.
Great.
And then the Forge Man cohort is guys who say, "Hey, I love this, and I want to have a higher level of commitment to this, and I want to have a higher level of connection with other men who are on the same path." And that looks like our weekly connections, and then day-to-day connections through a chat app that we use. But yeah, so that's a little bit about that, and it grew. I'll just end with this. It all happened because I was faced with the decision after 22 years in the investment advisory business, and just wrestling with God about, man, is this really what you have for the rest of my life, career-wise? Good at it. I understand this business. It's part of my career identity, and you're asking me to give this up.
Sure.
And just realizing that over the course of being in that industry, had interacted with so many men who were in their 60s and 70s, and the recurring theme was that they had left their life and legacy to chance. They might have been successful in business, But all these other areas that they just thought would work out, they come to find out they actually didn't. And my heart became, man, how do I interrupt that process for myself, um, and get off of that path? And then how do I help other men do the same wherever they're at? And so that's the heart behind it, is to have not just uh, something produced today in terms of growth, but man, 10, 20 years down the road to look back and say, yeah, I did not leave the most important things to chance.
Well, it's so true. I think like, well, first of all, community, I think for men, and I know Zach has struggled with this too, is, he's busy with his job,
Yeah.
And then we have kids' activities and we have church, and that leaves zero time for connecting
Yeah.
with other guys, unless it's his coworkers during the day, right?
Right.
And so if you leave it to chance, it doesn't happen. Like, it has to be so intentional to have that community. And I love that you are doing it in a way that brings it to a phone, right? With an app, right? And, it just makes it so much more manageable. To bring that intention to every day, especially in relationships. So I think that is such a great thing that you're doing.
Yeah, 100%.
Sure.
Yeah, I think time is a big factor for us men. So that's something that I always keep in mind when we're designing what our monthly, what I call the MAP, monthly action plan, which really hones in on one particular aspect. So like for this month, we're diving into anger and the topic of anger and how that shows up in our lives and how we navigate that in a way that it can be fruitful. And also an example, again, to those who lean on us for love, learning, and leadership, right? So
yep.
I always work so hard to make those hours that we're together just like packed with goodness and good questions to help us dive deep and then walk away with a couple of things that we can take action on. We love talking about the big ideas, but man, if we're not taking action on them, then we're not really growing. We're just growing in knowledge, but we're not growing.
Right.
So, and then I think also men today, they face the factor of when you're in community, true community, it requires vulnerability, and that's been a big tag word, the last decade or so. And I think what happened is men went from very unvulnerable. In the last about 15 years, they swung this pendulum to like overly vulnerable, and then they end up getting wounded because they've opened up to too many people who give too many opinions that they don't really have a good relationship with. And so finding the balance in that, I often talk about it in terms of, vulnerability is knowing the difference between taking that armor off and knowing if that person is going to wound you and if it's going to be a stab wound or a surgical wound. A surgical wound is a healing wound. So we want to create a community of men who know each other, trust each other, walk through life together in a way that there's trust built. And so that I know that when one of these guys says, hey, you said you were going to do this and you totally flaked out, dude. What does that mean for your family? What does that mean for your career? I know that he's doing that because he cares about me, not because he's just trying to give a jab or elevate himself or, show off his knowledge and arrogance. So that's a big factor too, I think, for community, for men, and some of the hesitation to jump into it these days. So.
Yeah, for sure. I think that, Zach and I, from the various communities we've been in and different studies we've done and, classes at church, like that, there is so much power in vulnerability within the right context.
100%.
I mean, because I feel like the enemy really wants us to feel like we're isolated and we're alone and nobody else is going through what we're going through. And, we got to keep that locked down because if anyone else knew, it'll be the end of me. But
that's so true.
That's not God's way. Yep. God's way is vulnerability within a safe community, for sure.
Yeah, I think that today one of the greatest challenges that men face is related to comfort and isolation. When we really look at the state of men, we find that most of them, a big overarching challenge is them knowing their purpose and pursuing their purpose in a world of comfort. So often, again, this even talks about going back to the growth and goal setting, and we see this purpose, and we see it off in the distance, like, so I've got to get there. And yet, if we're intentional, we can find our purpose and live the purpose and the calling that we have in our life in each moment. If we're aware and we're being intentional about it. The challenge is, unless we bring our purpose into the present moment and pursue it with intentionality, comfort is always right there. Comfort is always in the
Mm-hmm.
present. And so that is probably the biggest challenge that I see with men, is knowing and pursuing their purpose in a world of comfort. Um, and so much of that comfort for men looks like isolation or becomes isolation. And so those two factors are huge for men. It's one of the main
Isolation.
things that we talk
Yeah.
about and combat all the time within the cohort.
Yeah. And I would say an escapism too. Isolation and escapism, right? I mean, it's usually, and they usually go hand in hand. We're escaping while we're isolated. And I think that, I would say as a woman, that's just as much for women as well. I mean, I think we tend to be much more vulnerable and community oriented naturally.
Right.
But yeah, I can see that being in men, because you're in your daily job, right? You're a provider, responsible for the family. It's a different role, and it's easy to go about your life very unintentionally in that.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you sharing that, because I speak about these things, and obviously I am a man and I work with men.
Right.
I know, and I can speak pretty factually that this is how it works there, but it absolutely does have its own version. As I talk with Harper and we talk about some of her challenges and things that she's walking through, it's the same concepts, but they show up differently. The symptoms look different. And so it's definitely widespread across both. But I think too, isolation, there's a difference too between isolation and solitude. Just speaking of intention, isolation is just unintentional. It's that stepping back, stepping away, and disconnecting.
Right.
However, for men, one of the things I do encourage is, man, when you feel that sense of disconnecting, becoming isolated, number one, have 1, 2, 3 guys that you say, hey, this is what's going on. I'm doing okay, but just there's some accountability there, and those guys know, hey, if I don't hear from him in a few days in terms of an update where he's at, I'm going to check in and just see how I can serve him, see how I can help. But also, it's okay for men to not isolate, but to have solitude. And I think that is one of the biggest differences, is we don't want to eliminate solitude for men, because it is important. Us men, we need to get away and be by ourselves. I think that's why so many of us like hunting. Right. Hunting is great, but man, 8 hours in a tree stand where you have to be quiet and everything else is quiet is great.
Right.
Isolation is unintentional disconnection, or disconnection with lack of intention. Isolation I look at as, no, it's a very intentional stepping away and being purposeful with that time, and not falling into just comfort in that time, right? But to do it intentionally, to be connected with the Lord, to be connected with 1, 2, 3 other men that you're close with. So I think there is value in that. And so why I'm saying this, I think sometimes it's the baby gets thrown out with the bathwater.
Right.
Men feel like, oh, I'm never supposed to be by myself, right? No, schedule that, like work that into your life, but do it with intention.
Yeah. No, I think that, the episode I did last week was about stillness, and Zach and I are in this emotionally healthy spirituality class at church. And, every day, twice a day, we're, to be engaging and creating these moments of stillness, just being alone and quiet with the Lord, like not even necessarily praying, but just sitting in that stillness. And it's a practice, and it's difficult for me as someone who, my brain is always racing all the time, all the things, a million boxes. It's messy up there. But what I look at it as is that solitude, that silence, is us really providing an opportunity for the Lord to fill us, or not, or talk to us, or whatever. It doesn't matter. Whereas isolation is more about us creating our own void, but then trying to fill it ourselves with something, whether that's, could be endless scrolling, right? Like that's the easiest one these days, to isolate and to yet try to fill it with other things. So I love that you bring that up.
Which is an amazing phenomenon. Like we can be in a group of a bunch of people and still be isolated because of what we have access to technology. It's just a new challenge.
So true. Yeah. It is a new challenge, but yeah, you're so right. Well, is there anything else that you wanted to add on or chat about here while we're here?
No, I jumped in just ready to go wherever the questions took us. So I appreciate the questions. I
Awesome.
think really well thought out, and I think we covered a lot of different things.
I think we
And
did.
hopefully, there's some valuable things that people can take away. I know
Oh,
some of what you
absolutely.
shared, really thankful for. Um, and yeah, it's one of those things where I feel like I have so many conversations with people. And I'm like, that could have been a podcast. And so I'm glad that this conversation actually is going to be a podcast. That's pretty awesome.
So Ryan, when are you going to start your podcast? Because I would totally listen. I
Oh,
tell you all the time. I wish I was a man so I could be in your Forge Collective because I think
yeah,
it looks awesome.
yeah. That will come. That day will come.
Okay, good.
That going back to just looking at the seasons,
Yeah,
it's like that's a very obvious next step.
it's coming. Okay,
And
good.
I don't know when, and I know that in this season it probably isn't, but
Okay.
maybe the next season. So stay
Okay.
tuned.
Well, you've already got one subscriber whenever
All
that
right.
comes out because I will tune in for sure and I will
Awesome.
listen.
Awesome. Yeah. As far as where people if people want to check out Forge Man
Yep,
Collective
that's
on
what I was going to
Facebook.
ask you.
Yeah, Forge Man Collective on Facebook. My Instagram right now is just the word one, Guerra Life. So people
Okay.
want to jump on there, that's fine. But yeah, and then forgemancollective.com.
Okay.
Forgemancollective.com. And that talks a little bit more about the community side, the
Great.
weekly connection, things like that. People want to check that out. So
Awesome. Well,
yeah,
I'll make
thank
sure
you.
I get all those links in the show notes because it's a great place and more men need to be in that with you now,
Well, thank you.
yesterday.
Thank you. And there are a lot of great communities like that, like the Forge Man out there, and the need is so huge that for the right guys, this is the right one, and there's other ones out there that are great as well. And so it's just good to be part of some men who are intentionally stepping in. And I've learned a lot from guys who have done this 5, 6, 7 years ago, and just really figuring out who are the ideal men for what we're doing has
Yeah.
been a lot of fun, and developing those relationships with these guys and walking alongside them. So looking forward to it.
Well, it's very cool. Well, you are
Yeah,
doing exactly what you and Harper talked about, bettering others, for
yeah,
sure. Well,
that's
thanks
about.
for being here today with me, Ryan, and
Yeah,
working with me on the technical difficulties. And I can't wait to get this out there for everyone.
yes, sir. Absolutely. Thanks,
All
Chelsea.
right. Thanks, guys.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.